If you've got your Pearson Edexcel English Literature Paper 1, now this is the Poetry and the Modern Prose paper coming up soon, and you're a little bit worried or anxious or you're not quite sure what the paper entails or what you have to do, then this video is for you. I'm going to walk you through each section of the paper, I'm going to talk you through each of the question requirements, and I'll even look at bits of the mark scheme that might be relevant to help you achieve the maximum you possibly can on this paper. Okay, so for the purposes of this video, I've just taken a paper from 2024. It really doesn't matter what year the paper is taken from, the format is generally always the same. The first thing to note about this is it is a 2-hour paper, which sounds like quite a long time, but in actual fact, there is quite a lot to do in this one, and it is something you have to take care with in terms of your time management. This is the paper where you have 3 sections to complete. So there is an unseen poetry question, there is the anthology poetry question, and there is the question on the modern prose. Now that is the text that you have been studying in your centre. So depending on what your school or college or centre has chosen, you will have studied one of these texts, and I'll come to which one I've done with my students in a moment. But in terms of the unseen poetry, this is the section that tends to worry students the most because, of course, it's the unseen element that they feel unprepared for, really. But remember, there is 20 marks for this, which is actually half of what the modern prose is worth. So I think as daunting as the unseen poem might be, it is worth noting that it's worth half of the marks that the section C is. So we do have to be proportionate with our response to that. And remember that the rule of thumb on average is about 1 minute per mark. So for a 20-mark question on the unseen, I wouldn't be spending more than 25, maximum 30 minutes, okay? But before you start to answer this question, you of course need to get to grips with the poem. So it says you should spend around 35 minutes on this question. That's including the reading and annotation time. Now, I'm not going to do a detailed analysis of the unseen because this is a walkthrough video, but if you want a quick and easy acronym to try and remember, and again, depending on what your teacher has taught you as to how to approach unseen poems, then you go with that. But a quick and easy one that I often reference with my own students is the CLIPS model. Content, what do you get as the general gist in terms of this poem being about once you've read it once or twice? And it is important to read it through more than once because you're never going to get the understanding of the content upon one reading. Even as a seasoned English teacher with an English degree, I can never understand what a poem means if I only read it once. I'm going to need to read it 2 or 3 times. So remember, they don't want you to understand every single detail about it. There's simply not time. But they do want you to pick up on the general gist of what's going on. So C is the content, and the title will usually give you a way into that. And of course, on this occasion, the title is Unfinished Poem. So straight away, that should start to give you some ideas as to what this poem might be about. The L is language or linguistic features or literary devices. So what are you noticing in terms of similes, metaphors, personification, allusion, imagery, oxymorons, juxtaposition, all the language or literary features that you probably will start to pick up on quite quickly. I will always be there. That is your imagery. So what pictures, what images are being concocted in your mind when you read these words on the page. They will usually be quite important. P, and I'll probably mention this a few times, but personal response or personal engagement. What has the poem made you think or made you feel? Unlike in English language, English literature is all to do with how you have related to a text, be that a poem, be that a short story, be that a play. The examiner in literature wants to see what your thinking is. And I think in the unseen poetry, unlike any other section of a literature exam, that comes to the fore because you have not been taught this poem. Unlike the anthology poems, unlike the prose text, whichever one it is, the unseen is unknown to you until the day of the exam. So it really is going to demonstrate your own thoughts and possibly feelings about a piece. So that's very important. And the S is the structure. So along with the language and the literary devices, you need to be considering how is this put together? Is there a rhyme scheme? Is there not a rhyme scheme? In this case, I don't even need to read the poem, but I can see each stanza until the last one is 3 lines. So already there must be some significance as to why that line is singular when you've got these tercets in the run-up. Is there a rhyme scheme? If not, why not? You might have a poem that's blank verse or free verse. Is there enjambment? Do the lines flow into one another? How does it begin? How does it develop? How does it end? So students tend to worry about structure or minimize how much they actually write about in terms of structure, but it's not that difficult with poetry to consider rhyme scheme. If there is a rhyme scheme, is it jaunty? Is that meant to make you feel upbeat? Is it light-hearted? Or if there's an absence of rhyme scheme, is it quite chaotic? Is it unpredictable? And does that link to what the poem might be about? So 35 minutes on this, I would say 10-15 minutes maximum trying to figure out something to say on all of these, and then get on with answering the question. And that's a key thing to mention. Many students here forget that there is actually a question to answer. What they will frequently do is read the poem, figure out these things to talk about, and then just throw everything into a response instead of answering the actual question. And on this occasion, the question asks, explore how the writer presents nature in the poem. Now again, if you read the question before you come to the poem, that should also give you a way in. So even before I've read it, I should know that there's some element of nature present. It will also give you some bullet points. In your answer, you should consider the writer's descriptive skills, choice of language, use of form and structure. Well, if you've worked through a model like I've suggested, then you should have things to talk about in terms of language and structure, form and structure, language. But when it says you should consider these things, this becomes a checklist. You need to make sure you are doing those three things in your answer. Obviously, support your answer with examples from the poem. You can use quotations, keep them short. Sometimes the best quotations are actually one word. Zoom in. You are really picking apart the poet's use of one word or phrase. But I have seen students respond without any quotations from the poem at all, and typically that doesn't do you any favours. So 20 marks. The examiner mark scheme, the scheme they will have in front of them, will usually give lots of things to say. You might want to pause the video and have a read of some of those suggestions. I'm not going to go through those now. Sorry, that's the wrong one. This one. So you may want to pause the video and have a look at some of those items, but I'm not going to read through them all. But they often give a series of things that they're looking for in the description, several things you might be talking about in terms of language, and quite a few things to talk about in terms of form and structure. I've just highlighted that because I think it's important. These examples are suggestions only. Accept any valid response. Now, the mark scheme will give quite a number of suggestions as to what the examiner may be looking for, but because this is English literature, because this is a humanities subject, it's never going to be a comprehensive list of everything you possibly could say. So anything valid that sits outside of these items, if the examiner agrees with you, then you will get credit for. I've often had students saying, will the examiner knock marks off? Will the examiner deduct marks if I don't do this? No, the examiner is trained to give marks wherever they possibly can. If you've said something valuable, valid, worthwhile, then you will be awarded for it. And to get a level 5 on this, you are looking to write a cohesive evaluation of the interrelationship of the language form and structure used by the writer and the effect on the reader. What does that mean? It means how is the writer able to manipulate quite cleverly between language features, structural features? How does the whole thing come together to have some kind of impact on you as the reader? How has it made you think or feel? I liken it often to being like a magic trick. The magic trick is the effect. It's how it makes the audience feel. But your job is to explain the trick. How have they done it? How, almost going behind the scenes. And the other thing for a level 5 is discriminating use of relevant examples to support the response. A student getting level 5 is one that is being quite selective with the quotations that they're zooming in on. They're not just throwing anything and everything into an answer and hoping for the best. So that's what the discriminating use of relevant examples means. Okay? So that is the unseen question. Like I said, if you want me to do more on how to approach unseen poems, then drop me a comment below and I'll follow that up perhaps with future videos. Then we're into section B. Now this is a little where people perhaps are a little bit more relaxed because this is your anthology poetry question and you get a choice of 2. So hopefully you're going into the exam knowing these poems. Again, this is a walkthrough video, so I'm not going to necessarily go through each of these poems. I have made a series of quick revision videos on these. You may want to watch them. I'll stick a tag on this section of the video. But you should have read, sorry, this is my anthology, apologies for the highlights and scribblings, but there are 16 poems you would need to know. So you would need to have studied those in class with your class teacher, and you would need to have revised them all in the run-up to the exam. The choice of the 2 often follows the same format. The first one will name 2 poems. So on this occasion, it would be Half Caste and Remember, and it's asking you to compare the ways the writers express their feelings. So that needs to be the centre of your response in those 2 poems. You should make reference to language, form and structure, like with the unseen, and support your answer with examples from the poems. Now this is 30 marks, so this is worth 10 more marks than the unseen. So I would say 10 minutes planning, 30 minutes writing for around the 40 minutes to spend on this. The second of the 2 options is where they will name 1 poem, so on this occasion 2:30, but they will allow you to choose the other poem from the anthology that you wish. Now, this sometimes worries students, and frequently students will opt for the first one because they feel that, the half of the job is done for them by naming the 2 poems, and so all they need to do is get on and answer that. And I think some students are daunted by the fact that they have to choose the other poem for this option. I would say don't be dissuaded from that, and actually very often more able or higher ability students, so this is your grade 7, 8 and 9, will be the ones that opt for this one because they like the fact they have some agency over the choice of the other poem. Of course, there isn't one of these options that's easier than the other. It very much depends on what the 2 poems are on here. It could be 2 that you really like, you're comfortable with, you're confident with, in which case absolutely go with the first option. It might be the case that on the day of the exam, these 2, or at least one of them, might be your least favourite or the one you're most worried about, in which case here might be a more positive choice because you get to choose 50% of the poems that you talk about. So there really is no question that's easier than the other. Remember, you're only doing one, either this one or that one. The reason I say that, and I make no apologies for stating that obvious point, is because sometimes, and I have seen this, students will attempt both. You don't get any extra marks for that. You're not impressing the examiner if you do that. Just do one, and 10 minutes of those 40 minutes spent planning will pay dividends when it comes to your answering. Sometimes students are a little bit confused as to which to do and they think they could do this one or that one. My advice would be to do a quick plan for both. If you do a quick plan for both, 5 minutes, it could be a bullet point list of ideas that come to you really quickly. It could be a quick mind map, however you plan. 5 minutes spent deciding will save you from running out of steam once you've written your introductory paragraph and maybe one paragraph and then run out of ideas. So always plan. And when I say plan, I don't mean draft. I mean just get your ideas down as quickly as possible. And when you see which of the two you've got the most ideas on, that's the one you should do. In terms of the mark scheme for this section, again, like with the first one, there will be plenty of things that they are looking for. Responses may include, and all of these things. Responses may include all of those things. Remember, this is a comparison question, so they want to see how you are drawing together, compare, how you're drawing together the two poems, again with a series of suggestions. But that line is there again, as it frequently is in English literature papers. These examples are suggestions only, accept any valid responses. So as long as what you are saying makes sense, it's comparative, it's talking about language, structure, and is answering the question, then you will get credit for that. For 30 marks, and I've highlighted that statement there because it's important you understand you will not get higher than a level 2, so you cannot achieve more than 12 marks if you only talk about one poem. Now, invariably students remember that they're talking about 2, but I have seen occasions where students forget or they panic or they feel really uncomfortable with one of the other poems, so they only write about 1. However well you analyse one poem, you will only ever get up to a maximum of 12 marks if you only talk about 1. So to get a level 5, again, I'm going to focus on the highest level because that's what we should all be attaining or striving to attain. The response is a cohesive evaluation of the interrelationship of language, form and structure. So again, that combined approach as to how are the writers, poets manipulating all of these things for some intended impact on the reader. How effectively are you comparing and contrasting the poems? Are you balancing the amount of similarities with the amount of differences? If all you're talking about is the similarities, and you're missing a trick. You have to talk about similarities and differences between them. There may be obvious differences. The similarities might be a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more subtle. But try to make sure that wherever you talk about one thing, similarity, you're talking about one difference and vice versa. And as before, they are looking for you not to throw everything you possibly can into your answer. They want a discriminating use of examples. So be selective with the examples, the quotations, the details that you choose to write about, because that marks you out as a higher ability candidate. Okay, and then finally on to section C. Now for section C, I don't know which of these texts you will have studied in your centre. So I'm going to focus on Of Mice and Men for the purposes of this walkthrough because that's what I teach. My students, that's what we do at our centre. But you may well have done any of these other texts. So please don't panic on the day of the exam and go, oh, I didn't study this, I don't know this, I don't recognise this. All you are looking for is the text that you have studied and you ignore the rest. So for me, if I'd studied Of Mice and Men, I would go to section C, I would disregard the questions on To Kill a Mockingbird, I'd ignore the questions on The Whale Rider, on The Joy Luck Club. They're not relevant to me, I don't know those texts. Believe it or not, I have seen students in the past answer questions on texts they have not studied. I had one student who said they'd read the book, and I said, but we hadn't studied it in school, so why did you choose to do that? And It was because at the time they didn't like the question on the text we'd studied. But that is a high-risk strategy. That student didn't achieve as well as they possibly could have. So make sure you're only answering on the text that you've studied with your teacher. So in my case, we would be looking at the of mice and men questions. Again, you get a choice of two. Either do this one or this one. You are not doing both. And you have 40 marks up for grabs on this one. The advice is you spend around 45 minutes. So with that in mind, 5 minutes would be planning time. Here, again, you have a character-driven question and you have a theme-driven question. So whichever of the text you're looking at, whichever of the question options you are looking at, bear in mind the slightly different angle they may be coming at. Is it a character question? Is it a thematic question? And make sure that that's clear in your mind. For every single text and for every single question, this line is always there. You must consider context in the novel, of the novel in your answer. So irrespective of whichever of the texts you've done, that line will always be there. And unfortunately, students who underachieve on this forget about the context aspect. Hopefully, in the teaching of the text, you will have spent some time with your teacher going through how and where and why context is significant in your chosen text. So that needs to feature in your answer. The worst kind of responses to these questions are those that just retell the story. Okay, you're never going to get anywhere near full marks or a grade 9 if all you do is tell the examiner or retell the story to the examiner. They know the story. They've probably, like me, been seasoned teachers, seasoned examiners. They've probably taught all of these texts. You don't need to retell the story. What you need to do is analyze and evaluate the story in response to the question being asked, all the time weaving in context and relevant context into your answer. So in terms of the mark scheme for this one, for up to 40 marks, they are looking for assessment objective 1, how well are you able to demonstrate close knowledge and understanding of the text that you've chosen? How well are you able to be critical and present an informed personal response, personal engagement? How well have you been able to think for yourself? Yes, you will have been taught these texts and your teacher will have taught you many things, but the examiner here doesn't want to just read a regurgitation of your teacher's ideas and thoughts and feelings. They want to know what you've thought about it. And the better you can do that, the better your marks will be. So again, a level 5 criteria for this: assured knowledge and understanding. There is no question in the marker's mind that you know this text intrinsically well. The response shows assured personal engagement and perceptive critical style. How well can you question and look at characters from different angles? For example, in Of Mice and Men, it's easy to criticise Curly's wife for being flirtatious and for apparently having not much to do on the ranch. But a critical angle to that would be to say something like, Curly's wife is incredibly lonely. She's the only female on the ranch, so it stands to reason that she's seeking attention. So not only are you attacking her in one way, but you're empathizing with her in another. That's a very critical way of looking at characters, and hopefully you can do the same with the characters in the texts that you've chosen. And always understanding the relationship between text and context. So in this case, if you have studied Of Mice and Men like we have, you'd be talking about the Depression, you'd be talking about the 1920s, you'd be talking about racism, you'd be talking about the American Dust Bowl, you'd be talking about the plight of itinerant migrant workers, and so on and so on and so on. So wherever you can weave that into your answer, do. And finally, always, use of discriminating relevant examples in support. The modern prose is the only time when you are not given a copy of the text. So you having to go into the exam with some quotations ready at your disposal that you've memorized to use. So hopefully you've learned at least 5 good quality quotations that you can bend to any particular kind of question. My advice sometimes is to try and remember singular words. If you remember, for example, of Mice and Men, Lenny, he's obsessed with rabbits. If all you remember is the word rabbit, you can use that for a number of different reasons. You can use that as a character analysis of him and his very simplified view on life and what makes him happy, animals, soft things. Or you could use it in response to talking about the American dream, if that's a thematic question, and the fact that that is his dream in line with George to be able to go and purchase their own land and be the masters of their own destiny. So if you're getting wound up and worried and stressed about learning quotations from your given text, start by learning single word quotations and think about how differently you might be able to use just one word. So 40 marks, that is worth double what the unseen poem question is. So make sure that on average you're giving yourself nearly double the amount of time to do this. I have seen students run out of time on the modern prose section, and that's a shame because invariably they often have more to say on these texts than the unseen. Do your best with the unseen, but make sure you move on swiftly to the anthology and the modern prose, which is the bits of this exam that you will have studied in a lot more detail in the run-up. I hope that's been useful. If there are any questions or there's anything you want me to make future content on, drop me a comment below and I'll do my best to read them all. I do try to answer as many of them as I possibly can. Remember, examiners are not looking for perfection. Particularly with English literature, they are looking for personal response. So make sure you get that in. Do give me a like. If you like this kind of content, hit the bell icon for any future videos that I will release. And do have a look at the other linked videos on the poems that I've previously made to help with your revision. Good luck everybody and see you next time.